Right, thank you. Wow. The first thing I want to say is it's so good to be back. I was here 3.5 years ago. Who was here for that talk? Anyone here for that? Oh my God, and you came back, wow. So actually what I probably should say first is what this talk's all about. This talk is about performance. The last talk I gave at DaFED was all about CSS architecture. And the kind of stuff I've focused on for the last 12 months maybe, way more about performance. So there won't be any CSS today. So today is why fast matters. We're going to be looking at why performance is important from both a financial and a moral kind of point of view. We'll be looking at different statistics from around the world, emerging economies, people in regions that aren't as developed as ours. And then we'll look at some tactics and strategies for building faster websites. So who's interested in web performance? That's good. That would be really bad if 3 hands went up. Who would like to do way more performance kind of stuff, but feels that their manager doesn't allow them enough time or their client doesn't want to pay for it? Anyone feel like that? Yeah, that hand went straight up. Right, exactly, because performance, you can't see performance. You can see carousels, right? You can see responsive navs, but you can't see accessibility, you can't see performance, but it's absolutely vital. So that's what we're going to talk about here. But I'm going to go back to this slide because it is so good to be back. It was 3.5 years ago, and I came in November last time, 5th of November. And it was really, really warm, unseasonably warm. I was walking around in a t-shirt, it was amazing. And I forgot to check the weather forecast for this trip. And honestly, I don't even own a hat, so my ears nearly fell off about 5 times this trip. I've had a really light jacket on, and one thing I love about coming to Serbia is everyone's super friendly. So about 50 people have offered me jackets and scarves and hats. But I completely did not expect sort of -8 degree temperatures. But it's so good. I travel around quite a lot for work, and a lot of people ask me, where's the best place you've ever been? And everybody expects me to say Australia or New Zealand. But the honest answer is, probably my favorite place I think I've ever been is here in Novi Sad, right? Because when I think of Novi Sad, when I think of Serbia, I think of friends, new friends, old friends from the last time I was here, new friends I've met this time. And I mentioned this yesterday to a bunch of folk. One of the most difficult things I've ever done in my life is convince a Serbian to let me buy lunch. It has been impossible. No one lets you pay for anything. It's great. Another thing, right, this is a confession. The first time I was invited, when Stanislav and Danilo invited me to DaFED, I read the email and I was like, okay, a meetup. Meetups are normally quite small things. And I thought, Serbia, so a Serbian meetup, maybe that would be quite a small. And I thought, well, if it's going to be a small crowd, maybe I can talk about one of my biggest secrets, right? Something I've never published ever. Still haven't published it. 4 years later, still haven't published official documentation about this. So I gave a talk about CSS architecture, my own personal thing that I sell to clients. And I thought, well, maybe 30 people will see it, maybe 50 people will see it. What ended up happening is about 200 people turned up in person, and then it got recorded and went online, and it had 43,000 views. Absolutely insane. So this is another thing I tell people when I'm traveling. It's you think you've got meetups in the US, or you think you've got meetups in London? Wait until you go to a Serbian meetup. I was at, this is getting recorded, isn't it? So I probably shouldn't say this. But I was at London's most famous front-end meetup on Thursday last week, right, 6 days ago. London's most famous meetup. There were about 40 people there, right? Because I think the problem in England is people they're not as enthusiastic, perhaps. They're very ungrateful, I know that for a fact. So I just think it's so inspiring. I left DaFED last time feeling very inspired that so many people collectively give so much of a shit about what they do, right? So I love it. Anyway, wow. For those who weren't here last time or not aware, my name's Harry. I'm a consultant performance engineer from the north of England, which explains the funny accent. Now, I started calling myself a performance engineer about sort of 12 months ago. And it's magical, right? Because whatever you want to do, just make that job title, and people start giving you that kind of work to do, right? I started calling myself a performance engineer. Now everybody emails me wanting performance work. Next year I might be a baker, who knows? Keep in touch. So if you have any questions about anything performance related, any questions about anything at all really, keep in touch. Happy to hear from people. But yes, my focus at the moment is on making websites faster. And I've been really fortunate in my career that I've managed to do that with some very, very nice clients, some very interesting clients. One particular company on this slide, Trainline, kind of bottom middle kind of area. Trainline published a statistic a couple of years ago which stated that if they could make their website just 0.3 seconds faster, customers would spend an extra £8.1 million a year. Now, Trainline it's simply a train ticket booking application, right? It's a website where you buy train tickets. A 0.3 second improvement in performance led to an extra £8.1 million a year spend just on buying train tickets. So I actually helped Trainline with this bit of work. Some really fascinating insights from what we did together, but the good news is we made it way more than 0.3 seconds faster, right? 0.3 seconds is really easy to find. Vega team, Vega, put your hands up. Right, so we worked together. I worked with the Vega team over the weekend. On average, we made every single site that we profiled twice as fast, which was roughly 2 to 3 seconds faster. Just 0.3 was worth 8 mil to this company. So focusing on performance, imagine if you could make this website 3 seconds faster, right? You'd be millionaires. Another company that unfortunately is not a client of mine, Netflix. Netflix saw a 43% decrease in their bandwidth bill after turning on gzip. My first question is, why wasn't gzip turned on anyway? Like, who hadn't turned gzip on? This case study should really say, Netflix were throwing away 43% of their money by not turning on gzip, but a simple config change on a server led to a 43% decrease in Netflix's spend. So I hope that whichever developer was responsible for that change got very handsomely rewarded. GQ, Lifestyle magazine, they managed to cut load time by an incredible 80%. This is very, very sort of ambitious. 80% decrease in load times, so an 80% increase in organic traffic, right? So not paid for search, not social marketing traffic. Organic search went up by 80%, and then users spent an extra 32% of the time on site. So when I deal with clients who aren't necessarily e-commerce, their websites don't make money, it's harder to sell the idea of performance to them because they think, well, we don't make money through our website, so it won't matter. But what it can lead to is greater engagement, right? Users and customers want to hang around longer. They become more loyal, they become more interested. And I kind of don't want to say it, but GQ have ads on their site. And if you can increase ad impressions by 32%, you're going to make more money. Now, if you do struggle to sell performance to your clients, if you struggle to convince them of the importance, head to this site right here, WPO Stats, Web Performance Optimization, stats.com. Is like a library full of different case studies, research, and sort of papers and publications that deal with performance optimization success stories. And you can filter things like, I want to see every e-commerce report from 2016 that increased revenue. And you can find all this data and use that to convince your clients that, hey, look, you should spend money with us making your website faster. Each of these case studies, the three that I picked, taught us something slightly different. The first one said that we will make more money if we sort of improve performance. It will save us money and it will make users happier, which in turn makes more money. But it's not just financial. I want to talk about things. This is a very sort of capitalist, very, very Western worldview, right? Everything's always about the money. I genuinely believe there is a moral side to performance. There's there's good that we can do by having well-optimized websites. Straight away, an example for me would be I landed in Belgrade Airport on Friday and I turned my phone on and forgot to turn off data roaming. And I got a text from my carrier saying, hey, welcome to Serbia. It's £7.20 a megabyte here. I was like, shit, I quickly turned my phone back off. In that small amount of time I was on the runway, I spent £30 on data, right? 5 meg ended up transferring through different push notifications. I ended up checking Facebook before I got the message warning me. About €35 it cost, right? Because of potentially unoptimized experiences, that kind of stuff. But I've got 3 other anecdotes that I want to share with you, and all of these things happened last year. So not 10 years ago, not even 5 years ago. Each of these things happened in 2017. I was running an event in Leeds, the city that I'm from, running an event with a friend of mine. He runs a really nice coffee shop. And the event was approaching, so I sent him an email. Hey dude, can we work on this thing, blah, blah, blah. And he just never replied to me. And I started to get stressed out. It was like, we need to solve this thing. So I ended up going to the coffee shop and sort of popping up in person. Like the worst version of someone texting you, hey, sent you an email, is they'd actually pop up in your shop. Hey, I sent you an email. But he was like, oh my God, I completely forgot to reply. I was in Thailand on holiday, and although I got a push notification saying I had an email, the cell connection was way too weak to open it. It just didn't have the data, the infrastructure to even open a plain text email. The next one, this was interesting. I got an email from a developer in India who was asking me for some career advice. Right? He was beginning his kind of path in web development. So I sent him quite a long response. I spent maybe a couple of hours putting together a response, and he never got back to me. He just never replied. And at first I was like, nah, that's kind of rude, but whatever. And I soon got over it, forgot all about it. 2 weeks later, he emailed me back saying, I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to take this long to reply. I'm just on a really bad connection. And I said to this guy, look, I will forgive you if you tell me everything you mean by bad connection. And it was a really fascinating response. He said, I'm currently at my parents' place in Rajasthan, which is northern India. As my parents don't have a computer, they only consume the internet through their smartphone. We all rely on internet services by telco providers, which in our town are still 2G. Some of them claim to be 3G, but I've never seen that happening. Right now, I'm connected via a Wi-Fi hotspot, and opening Gmail in the basic HTML version takes between 30 and 60 seconds. Every other site, I use mobile Chrome because that makes preemptive data savings for me. So 2 fascinating things here. First thing, I barely ever have to open the basic version of Gmail, right? Maybe 5 times in my life I've needed to go and open the basic version of Gmail, and every time I've done that, it's been like the worst thing that ever happened to me. Oh, I can't believe the internet is so slow. But it still loads within 10 or 15 seconds. For this guy, up to a minute every time without fail for the basic version of Gmail. The second thing, when I go home, or when most of us go home or to the office, we've probably got a router in the corner of our room that beams out nice high-speed internet. And if you're very, very fortunate, that might be backed by a fiber connection. In my city, there's no fiber, it's really slow. But if you're very lucky, you might have a fiber connection. This family don't have that. What they've got is a commodity, like, $80 Android device that's plugged into the corner of the room, right? So when you've had the internet go down at the office and you've had to tether your own phone for an afternoon, and you're tethering maybe 4G, maybe 3G, just for an afternoon, but it's the most frustrating, unproductive, slow feeling in the world. Imagine having to do that 100% of the time, but it's not 3G or 4G, it's 2G. 100% of your internet life is spent on a 2G connection. This is how this guy's family lives the whole time. And they want the exact same access to the same information that we do. There's no reason they don't want to read the same things that we want to read, or browse the same websites, access the same social networks. They just happen to live in an area where connectivity is really bad. The third one, and my favorite one, someone sent me a direct message on Twitter asking me again for some advice, and this person's from Nepal. He's a developer in Nepal. Looking at my Google Analytics about 2 weeks previously to this exchange, I found out that Nepal was a problem region for my website. My website was slow if you're a Nepalese, if you're visiting from Nepal. So I said to him, hey, look, here's your answer, but can you just tell me, is my site slow for you? Because my analytics tells me that Nepal has a bad time visiting my site. His answer nearly knocked me off my chair, because he said, no, I don't think so. I click through onto your site and it loads within a minute. And that didn't feel slow, right? Imagine what a slow website is for this guy, like a week. I couldn't believe it. This 1 minute was fast for him. That's ridiculous. The other thing as well is, my site is meant to be fast, right? I'm a performance engineer. If I didn't have a fast website, people wouldn't hire me. If you visit my site from Dublin, for example, it'll be fully loaded and fully rendered within 1.3 seconds. For this guy, the exact same website, The exact same code, the exact same images, the exact same CDN, the exact same everything takes over 45 times longer just because he happens to be in Nepal. Right? It's this kind of geographic penalty that people are paying just because of where they live. Now, you may have noticed that all of these stories happened in sort of Asia and Southeast Asia. So what this talk's mainly going to look at is emerging economies, not developed countries, not Western countries, not European countries. Performance is absolutely still important in developed countries, but what I want to talk about is the next billion users. Has anybody heard of the Next Billion Users initiative? A couple of people maybe. The Next Billion Users is an initiative spearheaded mainly by Google. There is estimated to be, it's over 1 billion, but around 1.2 billion people in the world who aren't online at all, right? They just don't get online at all, ever. And in the next 5 to 10 years, they're going to start getting internet connections. They're going to start wanting access to the same data that we've got, the same data that we take for granted. There are over 1 billion people who've never seen it before. And we're expecting those people to arrive online in the next 5 to 10 years. If we can optimize for people like this, it means that our sites, our products, our services can already thrive in this emerging market, right? If we can optimize ahead of the curve, that means that we're going to be the people who can service these regions better. You may have seen this infographic before, fascinating infographic, because it turns out that more people live inside that highlighted area than outside of it. Yeah? Crazy, right? When you consider that places like China, India, Indonesia all fall within this splodge, it kind of starts to make sense. But more people live in that highlighted area than everywhere outside it combined. I'm going to quickly go through, I think, 4 particular countries from this region and tell you some of the statistics about how they access the internet, because it's absolutely astounding. Bangladesh, 3.5 meg average connection, 15% of people are online. Right? That means that 85% of people don't even have the internet in Bangladesh. With 3.9 million broadband subscriptions, that represents 2.4% of the population getting online with what we would consider a proper internet connection. You know, broadband Wi-Fi, right? However, with 134 million cellular subscribers, that's 83% of the population getting online with a mobile device. That's 34 times more people who are on mobile, high latency, low bandwidth, than there are on a proper, dedicated internet broadband connection. These figures all get kind of worse, by the way. 3.5 meg connection in India, 26% of the country is online. India has a very, very strong IT community, but it's all in the cities. In rural India, the internet basically might as well not exist. So 26% of the people are online. With 17.1 million broadband subscriptions, only 1.3% of Indians have what we would consider a proper internet connection. But with 1 billion, and that's not a typo, at 1 billion with a B, cellular subscriptions, 79% of the population get online mobile only. That's 58 times more people. Don't worry, I'm not going to do every country in the world like this. There's only a couple more. Pakistan, the slowest connection in the region, 2.5 meg connection. A fifth of people are online. With 1.8 million broadband subscriptions, that's only 1% of the population on a dedicated internet connection. 126 million cellular subscriptions equals 67% of the population on mobile. That's 70 times more people on a mobile connection than on a dedicated, stable broadband line. Indonesia, interesting one, the fastest sort of speeds of the group, 4.5 meg connection, a little bit faster, a fifth of people online, 2.8 million broadband subscriptions is only 1.1% of the population. But a weird thing happens in Indonesia. With 338 million cellular subscriptions, 132% of people get online with a mobile device. What this means, I think, is basically people, on average, have more than one SIM card, right? They might have 2 different data plans for whatever reason. And I think the reason for this is Southeast Asia is the world's fastest growing region, and Indonesia is its fastest growing economy. People here are very kind of online first, they're online ready. The people do like getting online, social networks, etc. So maybe that explains why 121 times more people in Indonesia get online with a mobile connection rather than a dedicated broadband connection. Whew, right, average these out really quick. 3.5 meg average connection, only 20% of people in that region are online at all. 80% of people never been on the internet. They're not on the internet. 1.45% of the population have a dedicated internet connection. 90% of them are on cellular. 90% are on a mobile-first kind of a mobile connection. Compare that to us. 10 meg speeds, 65% of us are online, 16.8%, around a fifth are on broadband. And this is the highest value I've ever seen. 120% of you have got more than one SIM card. Don't know what you're hiding from your partners maybe, but you've got a lot more than one SIM card, right? So I think that's the highest I've seen in Europe. That's very different to these different emerging economies, right? Very, very different. We've got a very kind of privileged just getting online for us is simple. It's fairly seamless because that's just the way it is for us. For a lot of people out there, over 1 billion of them, completely not the case. So what does this tell us? What does this tell us? It's a lot of data, a lot of information there, but we're building for a completely different profile of user. The kind of people that are coming online next are very, very different to us. This should influence technical decisions that we make. When we talk about designing mobile first, which is the right way to go, when we talk about mobile first, we normally think about, I write min-width media queries, right? Or we think, well, I design the smallest screen first in Sketch. Whereas what mobile first should mean is we should be optimizing for 2 or 3G connections first, right? Anything better than 2 or 3G is progressive enhancement at this point. That's a nice to have. So when we talk about testing for a truly global internet, mobile first means a genuine mobile connection first. Anyway, moving on. Get towards some more practical stuff now. One of the first things a client will ask me when we discuss performance optimization is how fast is fast enough? How fast should our website be? The bad news is there's no way to answer that. I don't know. It's very hard to say. You can get a feel for things over time, you can run tests over time, you can do benchmarking, etc. But my immediate advice is simple. Just be faster than your closest competitor. Find out who your closest business competitor is, and just make sure you're doing better than them. Performance is a competitive advantage, so the simplest place to start is just being faster than your nearest competitor. I found a really nice tool recently to help with this. It's called Dare Boost. And you can run these competitive analysis things for free. Take your URL, take your competitor's URL, feed it into this tool, and you can quickly benchmark them side by side. This is a really good way to start, and it's also a very good way to convince your client to spend money on performance, because you can just put your client's site in, your client's nearest competitor, and you can tell them, hey, just so you know, your competitor's quite a bit faster. If we can release maybe 10,000 more euro into the budget, we can do a full performance audit for you. We can do all this work, and we can focus on that for a month, or whatever. However you sell it in, it's data like this that helps win that kind of work. For more kind of enterprise customers, there's a thing called SpeedCurve. I'm a real fan of SpeedCurve, and this does competitive benchmarking over time. So you just leave this running, and once a day it'll test you and a couple of your competitors, and it will give you competitive analysis over time, and really quickly start to build up a picture of who's winning and why. Anyway, let's step into some kind of practical stuff. How to get there. I've prepared a few tips to help us achieve this, right? To help us start building faster websites. There are only kind of 3.5 tips, but unfortunately they're not like little BuzzFeed style, these 3 magic tricks for a fast website. Each one of these things will take quite a lot of effort, and it will take quite a big cultural change, but it's the best place to start. And the first thing to do, the 0th step, is just want a fast website. Clients always think I'm kind of trying to be smart or trying to be funny when I say this to them. But honestly, if you just want a fast website, if you and your developers and your designers and your client and your managers and the marketing team and everybody decides that, hey, look, this website that we're building, we want it to be fast. Just by making that decision, things get a whole lot easier. So don't underestimate the importance of this step. early on with client meetings or discussions with the design team or discussions with the marketing team or whoever, make sure that this is put front and center. Make sure you decide that, hey, look, we want to build a fast website. So every decision we make, every third party we use, we need to make sure it all points towards this common goal of we want a fast website. Anyway, the first real step then is understand the problem, but really, really understand the problem. Test your site from a completely different point of view. Building a fast website that runs really well on a shiny new MacBook that's not fast, right? Bad news for you. If it's fast on a MacBook, it doesn't make it fast. If it's fast on a Wi-Fi connection, doesn't mean it's actually fast. If you could be fast in the middle of a field, in the middle of nowhere on a 2G connection, if you're fast there, then you will be fast everywhere. And this is another thing I go through with clients. If you make yourself fast in bad conditions, the site will just fly in good conditions, right? If you can be fast over a 2 or 3G connection, imagine how good your site will feel if someone's got a proper dedicated line, or maybe they've got a fiber connection. Facebook did a thing a few years ago which really helped to prove this point, because Facebook kind of has a bit of a problem. I think pretty much every developer at Facebook looks a bit like me, right? It's a white dude who lives in sort of California in the nice Facebook campus where they've probably got super expensive brand new machines. They've probably got a dedicated line, like a Facebook-only line into the building. They have no idea what it really feels like for a user out there to use their application. So to help train them and teach them about this, they implemented 2G Tuesdays, which was a thing where every week on a Tuesday, obviously, anyone inside the Facebook building who was visiting facebook.com would be forced over a 2G connection. I mean, imagine how frustrating that would be, right? You're literally trying to access your own website and it takes a minute. But that's the whole point. It taught these engineers that, oh, okay, right, in the real world, like out there, this is what it feels like to access facebook.com. We didn't do a very good job, did we? And they managed to change things, and this forced them, or at least taught them, to put performance front and center, just by having that empathy and understanding how others felt their service. Now, I personally, I lack the skills to set this up. I couldn't IP ring fence a building and say that it needs to be disconnected, but I couldn't do any of that, right? I don't have the technical skills. What I can do, though, and what I do with clients, is I set up Charles Proxy. Who's used Charles Proxy before? I want every Vega hand to be going up, come on. Charles Proxy, it's free in the same way that Sublime Text is free. Hey, buy Sublime Text. Of course not. Charles Proxy, free, go and download the free version, you can use it. What it's got is this amazing feature where you can actually tell Charles Proxy to slow down a connection between your machine and a specific domain. And what this means is you can say, localhost, run over a 2G connection, or staging.client.com, run that over a 3G connection. Or if you wanted, you could say, let's just run typekit over a 2G connection, see what happens if typekit's running slowly. So I use this all the time with my clients to help them realize how their applications either respond or feel under adverse conditions. I'll make these slides available immediately after the talk, so don't worry about memorizing or taking too many pictures. So yeah, Charles Proxy, use it, it's great. The only downside to Charles Proxy with the free version, like the free version of Sublime is a pop-up every 30 minutes. With Charles, it just turns itself off every 30 minutes if you use the free version, which is a pain in the ass, but yeah, it's fine, we can live with that. Got some bad news though. So far, all I've talked about is connection speeds. It's not just connection speed anymore. There are way bigger problems to solve than this. Connection speed is just half the battle won. Who's got a phone like this in their pocket? This is an iPhone 7, I think. Anyone got an iPhone 7? Anyone got like anyone got an iPhone 10 or an 8? Lucky, lucky people. Anyone got like a fairly new Android device, fairly modern Android device? Yeah, a lot more hands. Now this is quite I don't know, I don't want to keep using the word privilege, it's overused, but devices like these, like new Android devices, like a new Samsung Galaxy, whatever it is, not the exploding one, or like a new iPhone, or a new Google Pixel XL, or all these new kind of devices, they're all got pretty good chipsets in them. They're all pretty fast. But current advice from Google's performance engineering team is that the most globally representative device is actually a Motorola Moto G4. It turns out that the biggest iOS or iPhone market in the world is the US, followed probably closely by, I think, the UK. Everywhere else, the whole rest of the world is mainly Android, kind of an Android using sort of market. And this, the Moto G4, who's got a Moto G4? Anyone got one of these? Boo. This is a monologue, buddy. You're not part of this.
Expensive, like iPhone 8. Is it expensive?
No, well, it depends what you mean by expensive. Like, an iPhone 8 is going to cost you like a liver. No, a kidney. You've only got one liver, a kidney. That's what I keep doing wrong. I keep getting rid of livers. An iPhone 8 is mega expensive, like super expensive. This is around 130 to 150 euro. So it's more affordable, but as a global average device, this is what we want to be looking at. Whose company has a device lab? Yeah, a couple. I know there's people lying. I saw Vega's a device lab, I saw it. So anyway, if you've got a device lab, add something like this. Most device labs are to test things like browser compatibility or touch interactions. A Moto G4 is a really good addition, just purely for performance testing. I bought a Moto G4 about a week and a half ago, and it's amazing just how different websites are on this phone. Just doing some quick benchmarking, the iPhone 7 Plus is roughly twice as fast as a Moto G4, right? The CPU is roughly twice as good. More forensic benchmarks show us that the iPhone 7 Plus is actually about 3 to 4 times faster than a Moto G4 across pretty much every test. Now, I've worked with developers who basically get out their nice, shiny iPhone and they test the website and think, yeah, it's pretty good. What they don't realize is that someone on a Moto G4 would get a website that runs at 25% of the speed, just because they happen to have a different phone. We can start to get an idea of this kind of CPU degradation, I guess, or this different kind of CPU by using the throttling that's available in DevTools. Who's used DevTools as throttling before? Nice, that's good. Good to see a lot of hands. This is a really great place to start, right? If you just want to quickly test something and see if it's running fast enough, start here. But there is absolutely no replacement for real devices. If you can get your hands on a real device, you'll get way more realistic information. I only recently bought a Moto G4. Before that, I was using an even older device. It was a Nexus 5, and this is so much slower than an iPhone, right? Crazy difference. So I actually used this phone for my performance testing, and I was doing an audit for a client. They just finished rebuilding a mobile site. It was m.company.com, literally a website only for mobile devices. They'd never actually tested it on a mobile, right? Because they don't build websites on mobiles, right? So they were in an office in central London with very, very high-powered either MacBook Pros or the software engineers had massive, great big Linux boxes with like 32 gig of RAM in there. And most of their mobile testing was resizing Chrome, right? Because, come on, that's how we mobile test things. As soon as I plugged my phone in, did some kind of remote kind of phone performance profiling, mobile profiling, I learned that their brand new, like literally brand new, fully client-rendered JavaScript application, it took 1.78 seconds just to read their app.js. Not to execute anything, not to actually run any code, but just to actually parse and evaluate app.js took 1.78 seconds. Trainline, a client of mine, they said, remember at the beginning, 0.3 seconds was worth 8 mil to them. This company is wasting 1.78 seconds just reading in 95,000 lines of JavaScript for what actually was just one basic HTML form. That's what their homepage was for this client. That's pretty bad. So yeah, build up a realistic idea of conditions, network conditions, device conditions, all this kind of stuff. Build up this knowledge bank, learn exactly how things happen. Use Charles Proxy to throttle your website. Do all this stuff to stress test it, and absolutely test on more commodity devices. Whew. Step 2, know what's going on, but really, really, really know what's going on. So often I will work on a site And I'll be coding all the bits, and I'll be looking at my bit of work, and I'll know what I'm doing. And then I'll sort of push my chair back at sort of 6 p.m., and I'll go home thinking, I did some good work today. Then I'll visit a live website, and it'll be an absolute car crash about how on earth is it running so slowly? Where's all these different files coming from? What on earth is this? Who feels like this is part of their working life? Like, what does this script do? Do we even need this? Anyone gone through this feeling before as a developer? Yeah? Right. Do we even need this anymore? Oh, I don't know. It's an analytics package that someone who worked here 5 years ago paid for. We've lost the login details, and we don't delete it. It's like, what are you doing? So this happens to me all the time, especially on client websites where I'm very new to the project. I've got no idea what anything's doing. We need to solve this problem. It makes you a very, very, very valuable developer if you can actually look around the company and start identify this team uses this analytics package, but this team uses a different one. Why can't we coalesce? Why can't we use the same thing? It makes you a very powerful and important member of the team if you're able to go around and have those conversations. Find out who's using what. Find out what everything is. Find out if you can better support them. If you've got, like I say, 3 different analytics packages, why? Why do we need 3 different analytics packages? Isn't there one that does 90% of what we need? One of the biggest problems here, one of the biggest sort of negative impacts is tag managers. Just an honest show of hands, who's not sure what a tag manager is? Yeah, I said an honest show of hands. Come on, all right, a couple, thank you. Otherwise this next bit would have been really boring if you were like, we know what it is. I only learned what a tag manager was about 6-9 months ago, and a tag manager is this. A client comes to you and says, hey, can you just put Google Analytics on the website? And you're like, yeah, sure, I'll do it this afternoon. And you put Google Analytics on. And the next day they say, hey, can you install this as well? And you're thinking, I'm really quite busy. Put it on the to-do list and I'll get around to it. And the next day, can you put this on? Can you put this on? And you end up saying to them, look, I can't keep breaking off for this stuff. So what somebody did is they invented what's called a tag manager. And with a tag manager, all a developer does is installs one snippet of JavaScript. And that one snippet of JavaScript has a CMS kind of interface behind it that the client logs into. And the client can say, I want this analytics, I want this thing, I want to test how many people click on that button, I want to see what happens if this button turns blue. And basically a tag manager is a way that non-technical people can add JavaScript to a live website, just by a WYSIWYG kind of Dreamweaver for marketing teams, right? How bad is that? And what happens is, you installed one small JavaScript file, and you think that that's that's safe, that makes sense, it doesn't feel dangerous. Then what happens is that other JavaScript file loads in all of this stuff without the dev team ever being involved. That leads to situations like this. This was a client I worked with very briefly last year. The green highlights their website. This is the website that the developers built. The green is what the user actually turns up to see. However, at the bottom, or towards the bottom, we introduce a tag manager. And the tag manager is what says to all the other scripts in the world, hey, come and join in. So the red is what gets sent to the user. Get comfortable, it keeps going. These things are dangerous. These are really bad because we think we did a good job. We test the website locally and it only downloads 18 files. Perfect. It goes live and this happens. These are huge liabilities. We need to do kind of third-party auditing and make sure we know what this stuff is so that we can tell our clients, hey, look, the reason your website is slow isn't because of us, it's because you went trigger happy with your tag manager and look what you've done. So know your liabilities. For years we've called them assets. Hey, can I have the assets for the website? They're not assets, they're all liabilities. They're all a chance for something to go wrong. Third parties can and will cripple your performance, and I'm going to show you some real examples from clients that I've worked with. This is a big UK fashion retailer. They actually make about £1 billion a year, right? Disgusting amount of money. But how cool is that, right? They put a lot of money through this website, and because of that, they spend money on A/B testing tools, different analytics, different kind of optimizing things. But ironically, we learned that it was actually optimization tool contributed 98% of the runtime overhead to that website. I realize that's probably a little bit too small for people at the back, so you just got to trust me, I guess. This optimization tool added 98% of the runtime overhead. There's a painful irony in that, right? If you want to kind of learn who to blame when websites feel to be running slowly, in DevTools, in the performance panel, find a section that says bottom up, and in there there's a drop down and select group by domain. This will literally list all of the domains that web page is calling, and it will tell you which web pages are the worst offenders. Which web page has the most expensive JavaScript? Which web page makes the, or sorry, not which web page, sorry, which third party has the most expensive JavaScript? It'll literally tell you a list of people who are ruining performance for you. It's always nice to be able to blame somebody else, right? So on this website, on this project, me and the CTO got together and we ripped all of this stuff out. We re-platformed the site. We didn't redesign anything, we just rebuilt it. And we tore all this crap out, we got rid of it all. And what we did is 2 weeks later, we found that all of the sort of business metrics were up, right? The site was making more money. Users were spending more time on the site. Users were adding more things into their cart, their shopping basket. And conversions were up. Everything was good news. And the client was so happy. They were really grateful for the work we'd done. And they said, now the website's a lot faster. It'd be really great if we could kind of measure what's going on the page. Can we add this tracking thing, right? Can we add this A/B testing tool? And me and the CTO were like, no, definitely not. The whole reason things are good is we got rid of all that shit. They're like, nah, trust us, come on, put it back in. And unfortunately, that was a battle that me and the CTO lost. We had to put these tracking things back in. What ended up happening is first paint went from 0.8 seconds up to 2.1. They were using a client-side A/B testing tool, which is the devil. We managed to just put these things back in. We ruined the performance. All the things that they'd paid me to help them with, all the things we'd spent weeks improving, they undid it all just by putting this stuff back in. You need to be very, very aware of your third parties and what kind of risks they bring. So let's talk quickly about finding these third parties. If you've got DevTools experiments enabled, you hopefully might be able to go into the experiments panel and find this, Network Request Group Support. Really catchy title. Go in there, find this. If you don't have experiments enabled in DevTools, come and find me afterwards and I'll show you how to get there because it's kind of funky. But then when you do that, in the network, second thing, after you've done that, in the network panel here, right-click on one of the titles. Hopefully you'll see an option that says product. Once again, this is tiny for those of you at the back, I apologize. But the product column then appears in your waterfall and it starts to give you really valuable insights. It literally tells you where things are coming from. So here we can see we've got this new column here, product, Rubicon project, etc., etc., etc. It literally names all these files. When you look at a waterfall chart and you've got all these little tiny pixel GIFs or these random bits of JavaScript, all this kind of stuff appearing from everywhere, it's really hard to know who that belongs to. The product column will tell you. I turned on the product column because I wanted to see what was going on here. There's a file here that took 35 seconds just to open a TCP connection. This is really, really bad. And what you may be able to see is there's a red line down the right-hand side of this view. That's the load event. So whatever this file was holding the load event back to about 35 seconds. That means any scripts that run on the load event took over half a minute to execute. Turns out it was a company called the Rubicon project. I'd never heard of the Rubicon project, so I Googled it, and sure enough, it's an ad network. Of course it was. This is why people have ad blockers. But having this information allows you to tell your client, hey, the biggest bottleneck on your site right now is this ad network. Can we use a different one? Or can we open a support ticket with that ad network and say, hey, look, can you improve performance because we spend money with you and things keep going wrong. This kind of gives you the ammunition you need to make those changes. Or another thing that I find very effective is tweet at the Rubicon project, or if you can, find their CTO. I've done this so many times. Hey, I noticed that this is happening, and yeah, we'll fix it. Or, hey, your ads are running over HTTP, and it's giving my users mixed content warnings. Sorry, we're on it. So yeah, just be shameless, go public. This stuff makes you vulnerable, makes you very vulnerable. Another thing I want to talk about in terms of tag managers is another client of mine. They're a real fan of Adobe Tag Manager. What I'm keen to stress here is this isn't Adobe Tag Manager's fault, but this is the example I'm using. However, to help me prove a point, who's used Google Fonts before? Yeah? Me too. I love Google Fonts. It's great, it's fast, it's just easy to use. Who just does the link rel equals style sheet, href is, open sans, right? We all do that? Who uses the asynchronous loader for Google Fonts? And the rest of you just in between. Anyway, link rel equals style sheet, blah, 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 can wipe your site kind of blank for up to 1.3 minutes. Linking to a critical asset, such as a JavaScript file or a style sheet on somebody else's domain, means that if their site has an outage, if that domain goes down, you go down with them. So the example I'm showing you is for Adobe Tag Manager, but also the exact same thing happens if you're using Google Fonts. If you use Google Fonts, they have an outage, your site will be a blank screen for 1.3 minutes. Literally, it will be a white page for 1.3 minutes. The reason for this is because the browser needs that style sheet, right? It's a render blocking asset, or it needs that JavaScript, because it's a render blocking asset. And it'll try for 80 seconds to find that style sheet or that bit of JavaScript. And if it can't find it, a built-in timer says, well, forget it, let's just continue. But that built-in timeout is 80 seconds. I actually did an internal talk to a company that really loved Adobe Tag Manager, and I actually made a screen recording of what happens when it goes wrong. I made them sit and watch a 1.3 minute video, and it was actually really awkward. I don't think I'll do it again, because for 1.3 minutes, I just had to stand there watching it with them. But they had no idea just how severe the problem was. They didn't know that if there's an outage with Adobe Tag Manager, their customers see a white page for 1.3 minutes. The customer's going to think the site's down, right? The customer's going to go somewhere else. Now, if you put your hand up to the answer, to the question, do you use Google Fonts, there's a high chance you might be panicking right now thinking, shit, is this going to happen to us? Are we vulnerable to this? The good news is there's a really easy way to test. Web page test, really great performance sort of measuring tool. Make available a black hole server, and it's always at this IP address. In your hosts file, take any third party you're interested in. For example, we're doing assets.adobe tag manager in the previous screenshot. Just drop that third party domain and map it to this IP address. Any traffic that your machine sort of goes through Adobe Tag Manager gets routed to this black hole server, simulates an outage. You can really quickly find out how well your site copes with these kind of things. So yeah, definitely use this. I guess the moral of this story is don't prioritize your own metrics over your users' experiences. You need to really push back on clients who want to do this kind of thing. There's no point measuring how fast your website is if it's too slow for users to use, right? There's no point doing that. Last section, I promise. Measure everything. There are two really key reasons we should measure everything. One, it allows us to know what's wrong, right? What's the starting point? If you don't understand the problem, you definitely can't solve it. A good example here is a client got in touch with me last year and they said, hey Harry, blah, 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 we run this kind of company, can you make our homepage faster? And I said, well, yeah, I can make your homepage faster, but how do you know the homepage is the problem? And they were like, oh, we don't know, we just want a faster homepage. I was like, well, look, I can do that, but give me access to your Google Analytics and we'll find out what the problem pages really are. Because most websites, you don't actually land on the homepage, right? You land on a landing page from Google. You land on a product page via Bing. Other search engines are available. The homepage is usually the least important. So we need to know what's actually wrong. It turned out for this client, the homepage was the fastest one on the website. It would have been a waste of money to make it faster when it was actual landing and checkout pages that were slower. And secondly, how do we know when it's right? How do we know when we've fixed it? How do we know when to stop? Who's got Google Analytics on their website? Yeah, most of us. I love Google Analytics. Who hasn't logged into Google Analytics for 2 years? Yeah, I admire your honesty. But the good news is, for that last 2 years, Analytics has been capturing very, very useful data. When you get back to the office, ask your client, or ask if you work for like a startup or anything, ask whoever's in charge for access to your analytics data, because it's always capturing performance information from around the world. If you get access to your analytics, head to behavior, and site speed, and then page timings, you can start to dig around and find out really valuable information. It's not perfect information, because it's free and it's not perfect, but it's a really great start. This is how I identified that this client shouldn't be spending time on the homepage. They should be spending time in different countries. This is how I found, different pages. This is how I found out that Nepal was a problem region for me, because you can literally click around a map and see things. It's so much fun. The same client who wanted their homepage fixing, I asked them, where is your target market? Where are your customers? They said, well, America, Canada, UK, Australia. It turned out that the two slowest regions for them were the UK and Australia. So why is that? Do we not have a good enough CDN presence in Australia? Is there a certain problem with the data center in the UK? It allows us to start sort of digging into this kind of stuff. As well as that, you can start cross-referencing specific pages in specific countries. You can start to work out, okay, the homepage is fast in Serbia, but really slow in Nepal. Why is that? And you can start to look at different differences there. You can cross-reference anything. One really good thing for clients is if they're an e-commerce client, perhaps, and they capture custom metrics, you can tell them things like, hey, did you know that for every time your site is slow, for every day your site runs slowly, you make 10% less money? Or for every day you run slowly, your bounce rate is higher. And you can start to use real business metrics to convince them. A thing I found really interesting, this is my own website, it turned out Brazil was a problem region. And so far we've been discussing Asia and the Far East. Brazil is also considered an emerging economy. I did a bit of research. It turns out that if you want to purchase 500 megabytes of data in Brazil, you'd have to work for 8.6 hours on minimum wage. It's basically a very full day's work on minimum wage to buy 500 meg of data. Let's say you did manage to limit yourself to 500 meg a month. That means that if you earn minimum wage, one day every month is spent just earning the money for your data allowance, right? How crazy is that? We need to be mindful and respectful of this, because every time we send a 2 megabyte image over the wire, that's somebody's afternoon they spent earning that image, right? I've got a travel SIM card, which I found out doesn't work in Serbia. That travel SIM card, I use it a fraction of the time. Only when I'm abroad do I use this SIM card. And in about an 18-month period, I managed to rack up 14 gigs worth of data usage. I decided to work out how much 14 gig would cost somebody in Brazil. Turns out it's a month, right? Imagine if you wanted to use 14 gig of data a year in Brazil, you'd have to spend basically your entire February earning your data allowance for the rest of the year. It's disgusting, right? How expensive this is for some people, and how sort of reckless we can be about it. And when I say we, I'm not saying you in this room, I mean people like adding 2 megabytes worth of tag manager crap to a page that weighed 75 kilobytes. It's that kind of thing. So I decided to set up some monitoring using SpeedCurve, which is one of my favorite ever tools. I measured the before. I knew the before was Brazil was slow. So I set up some monitoring. Started setting up some new tests from an agent in Brazil. When I say an agent, that sounds like pretty badass. I meant a test agent. It wasn't like a person doing it for me. SpeedCurve can be quite expensive for the enterprise edition, but they've got a pay-as-you-go thing where it's 1 cent per test. So for like $20, you can run 2,000 tests a month, which is basically what I do, and I run about 9,000 tests a month. So for $9, you can get access to all this kind of stuff. Anyway, I implemented a fix. I thought, well, if my site's slow in Brazil, I'll set up some more aggressive caching at the Sao Paulo edge server, and boom, there we go. Things got a lot faster. So, SpeedCurve, one of the things I love about this tool is that it does not take a technical person to see that something good happened on this day. It doesn't mention anything to do with DNS propagation or TCP time or time to first byte. This is a really great way of showing non-technical stakeholders that we're doing a good job. We are making your website faster. We can then use this to set up budgets. Like, who's ever done some performance budgeting work? Anyone done performance budgets before? A couple of hands, that's amazing. Not many people do them because they are quite hard to set up. I find that most managers don't like the word budget either, so I tend to just call it monitoring. But yeah, basically set up monitoring, alerts if things go wrong, ping off emails if something goes disastrously wrong. I decided to set my site up on speed curve just to run these benchmarks, just so I could see how I was doing. My site's pretty simple, not a very complex website. But it's got quite a lot going on. There's a lot of images on that page. There's an analytics package. There's an ad network. There's some other stuff, a little Twitter widget. This is Ireland. I mentioned Dublin before. I've got a test agent set up to run tests out of Ireland, Dublin. I've set a budget of rendering within 2 seconds. I'm actually getting 1.28 seconds here. Great, right? Dublin's a very well-connected part of the world. It's a massive kind of tech hub at the moment. Great infrastructure. The load time was meant to be 3 seconds. I'm actually achieving 1.28 again. Just by moving that test agent to Brazil and testing the site from there, we see that 50% of the time, I'm going over budget. Exactly the same code, exactly the same infrastructure, exactly the same CDN, exactly the same everything is slower on 50% of the days purely because that visitor happens to live in Brazil. They're paying a geographic penalty. What I decided to do after this was kind of really set the bar quite high, and I created a custom test agent which I called Very Bad Network. What Very Bad Network does is it simulates a very realistic but very kind of bad mobile connection, 2G basically. 150 kilobits per second download speed, half a second latency, so already we've got half a second just for a round trip, and 10% packet loss. Packet loss is prevalent in mobile, right? Packets go missing all the time, and packet loss is a huge reason why mobile sites or sites on mobile are much slower than they would be on desktop, right? Because mobile cellular connections suffer severe packet loss. This is where things got really interesting. Setting up a very sort of flaky mobile test agent meant this is what my graph started looking like. Like I was not doing a good job. It's kind of unacceptable, right? This isn't great at all, is it? So I found that, you can set up all the testing in the world, but as soon as you're on a very erratic connection, you're immediately on the back foot. You're immediately struggling to keep on top. And this is the kind of the picture of things if you're visiting from Nepal. Again, comparing it to all the other tests I was running, really erratic stuff. There is absolutely no consistency. If you look at the top line and just how erratic it is compared to the stability of the other ones, this top line represents these users who are permanently on mobile connections. This is just what it feels like for them. One day it could be reasonably fast. For the next 2 days it could be really slow. There's really no way of knowing without these sort of tests in place. Oh, right, okay, let's close up. Man, this is a long old talk, eh? Slide 95 of 98. I'm going to try and close up a 98 slide talk with 3 bullet points as well. First thing is just care, right? Just give a shit, right? Just want to build a fast website. Second thing is understand, right? Set up as much as you can to understand the shape of things. Set up as much as you can to test your site from different points of view. And finally, just measure everything. Another thing I didn't mention, another great reason to measure everything, is it gives you data to take back to your client. If you just make the homepage faster and tell your client, oh, your homepage is faster, they'll be like, great, cheers, we don't need to give you any more money, it's already done. Whereas if you say to them, hey, your homepage is currently running at this kind of speed, we estimate with 2 weeks of dedicated work, we could achieve this. That's how you get funding, that's how you get pay rises, that's how you get promotions. Like as individuals, measuring the before and after of everything should be a matter of course. If you're starting a refactoring project, measure how many lines of code you remove, right? Measure everything so you can go back to managers and just have some ammo to say, boom, look what I've been doing. Statistics and data, it's all true. There's no sort of fake news in this talk. You can fact check everything. And with that, I just want to thank you for your time. 59 minutes, wow. Thank you for listening.
We can start with questions. Does anybody have a question? When you say the question, Harry will repeat the question and then we'll continue. Okay, anybody? Dragan, I expect you. Anybody? No? Okay.
What about the Google AMP? Have you tried?
What about Google AMP? Right. The second hour of the talk will be me talking about AMP. No, so AMP, I'm really, I've tried AMP, so anyone implemented AMP on a client website yet? AMP? I think it's a really controversial subject. We should probably have a beer and talk about this one. But AMP is fascinating, right? I think AMP makes websites faster, which is a good thing. I want a faster internet. We all want a faster internet. But it's a very, very googly monopoly, and I don't like that. You can only access AMP sites from the Google AMP cache currently, so everything starts with Google AMP project.google.whatever / ultimate URL that the actual article lives at. It's writing non-standard code, so most HTML becomes standardized at some point. Even if a browser invents a new element first, the W3 will standardize it later. I can guarantee that's not going to happen with the AMP image element, right? So it's writing a non-standard subset of HTML. Google claim it's open source, but having it in an open repository doesn't mean it's good, right? I think that's a very smoke and mirrors tactic from Google that's saying, hey, it's open source, right, yeah, but it's not good. Like, just because you're telling people you're doing it doesn't mean it's good. And another thing that happened just a few days ago, don't know if anyone saw this article yet, turns out the only reason AMP feels fast, or the only time, that AMP will feel fast, is if you visit an AMP page from a Google search results page. If you visit an AMP page from an email or a WhatsApp message, it won't be any faster than a normal website. It turns out AMP only works if you visit via a Google search results page. Because what the search results page is doing is it's preemptively loading that page in the background, so that by the time you click through to it, it's like, oh wow, that was fast. An AMP page that you visit from a WhatsApp message or from an email or from a Facebook Messenger message won't be any faster than a reasonably well-built normal website. And that again furthers the kind of Google monoculture, which I sound like a hippie, right? But I just want the web to win. I want the open web to win. And I don't think AMP stands for an open web. It stands very much in Google's favor by design. But, you know, it's better than nothing, maybe. So yeah, I think I've got some concerns. A lot of developers have got concerns about AMP. Because of its lack of openness. But, you know, the other problem with AMP, in my opinion, is it fixes the symptoms rather than the problem. The problem is people stopped building fast websites, or the problem is that ad networks are disgusting, right? Because they've started putting crypto, like Bitcoin mining things on your machine, right? It's just disgusting. So the problem is actually years ago, and AMP is just like let's just cover this crack in the wall real quick. So I think, yeah, there's bigger problems. Long answer to a short question. I've got a good habit of doing that. Any other questions?
You mentioned the Google Fonts problem.
Mm-hmm.
Did you try any of Google techniques, and do you have any comments on that regarding, like, say, variable or scalable fonts, this new technique?
Yeah.
You can put every kind of variation of font in one file and then serve it.
So I'm going to rephrase the question so everyone hears it, and you can tell me if I did a good job of rephrasing it, right? So we talked about Google Fonts and the potential problems. Have I looked into new techniques for font loading, such as the variable fonts kind of, it's not a spec, is it? It's just like a thing, like variable fonts, etc. So yeah, have I looked into that kind of stuff? I haven't used variable fonts yet, but I can't wait until they're like ready to use. Currently, you've got to load like 5 different font files to get all the different weights and italicized stuff you need. With variable fonts, you can stuff them all into one tiny font package and get everything. It's going to be huge for performance. It's going to be absolutely amazing. Couple that with asynchronous font loading techniques rather than synchronous ones. Things like font display optional. Anyone heard of the font display spec? A couple of people? Cool. For those who haven't heard of font display, it's a new CSS kind of property which will tell the browser how to handle fallback fonts. Do we do a flash of invisible text, or do we do a flash of unstyled text? How long do we time out for? So you can now begin to control that flash of unstyled text from CSS. That doesn't have great support yet, which is a shame. So in the meantime, asynchronous loading techniques. I thought it was really interesting how recently Typekit announced that they were moving to a link rel equals style sheet method for loading fonts, which is actually the most fragile. Typekit had been doing it correctly for the longest time. Asynchronous loading was the way to do it. But to make the process simpler, they actually they made an option for a synchronous font loader, which is really bad for performance, really bad for resilience. So it's weird to see Typekit make that decision to provide like a simpler to implement, but more harmful for performance method. But yeah, if you haven't looked into variable fonts, definitely look into variable fonts, because that's going to change quite a lot of stuff. Is that an okay answer? Cheers.
More questions?
Any other questions? Sure.
So I watched today like comparison between loading times of iPhone and Android S9 like Samsung, the games.
Mm-hmm.
And basically like iPhone finished 5 times faster, like 5 minutes faster. And then the guy started looking at individual apps, and then it turns out that iPhone is basically just kind of loaded, while S9 loaded the full 3D, like the iPhone loaded the part.
Oh, okay.
So this is also happening in the web. We have like placeholders.
Mm-hmm.
And I read one article where the guy kind of did some testing, but it didn't feel convincing. While he's saying like these placeholders people actually hate. So I don't know if you have some experience with this. You know what I mean? Like when you open a placeholder.
The skeleton UI kind of, yeah. So the thing there is, a lot of the benchmarks that we looked at, like even the ones I showed, do show certain CPU slowdowns on different devices, but maybe that's because what the iPhone's doing is being a bit more lazy and lazy loading more stuff. Then it led into what was my general opinion on loading UIs or skeleton UIs, etc. I think they're a good idea. I think that if you can't show everything to a user, at least show them something. For example, that website that took 1.3 minutes to display anything, it should have something to tell me that, don't worry, we aren't down, like something will happen, just for my own confidence. So skeleton UIs, I think, are a great idea. They're not the easiest things in the world to implement, but when we start talking about PWAs and having like the app wrapper that stays permanently in like a service worker and sort of just hydrate the view when that's ready, I think it all makes perfect sense. It's better to show something than nothing at all. A little pro tip as well, right? Wrong website. This is Sky. I'm not going to set the full test up for you, but... Oh, right, you really didn't see. I thought you were joking, we didn't see. Oh, well, I'll have to tell you what happened now then. Won't I? Let me just... I went to the wrong website and it said access denied. Ooh. So let me just show you. Yeah, I went to this website, and I thought you'd all seen that. I wasn't supposed to visit that one. No, I'm just going to show you something really quick. This is the website I told you about where if Adobe Tag Manager doesn't turn up, we get 1.3 minutes of a blank screen. Now, JavaScript, a regular script tag like this one on line 9, is a parser and render blocking resource. So the browser cannot progress to line 10 or 11 until it's completed line 9 because it doesn't have an async or defer attribute. What this means is that while this page is loading, the title tag hasn't been parsed, so the actual tab in the browser just says https sky.com. So it really, really looks like the site is down. Literally, if Sky just swapped the script tag and the title tags around, the user would at least see in the tab of their browser Sky TV and broadband. Literally, even that could provide useful feedback to a user. Obviously, that's nowhere near as complete as a skeleton UI, but just give them something. If you know you've got a large JavaScript application, which is like a 1.2 meg app.js bundle, with a bit of inline JavaScript, what you should do is set the title of your title tag to be loading ... and then name of your website. Then once the app boots, there's a bit of JavaScript, second bit of JavaScript to change it back to the actual title, because you can start to give custom feedback in the title of the web page, right? There's no reason why you couldn't do that. So yeah, give the user something until you can give them everything. Any other questions? Hey. So when I first start dealing with clients on a performance project, what are the first things I look at? That's a really great question because I've got a set of standard questions, which is, why do you need my help? Like, why can't you do this yourself? Is it because you don't understand things? Is it like you've got a knowledge gap? Or is it a case of you don't have the time? Because that tells me a few things. If they say, we don't know how to do it, it means that, sweet, it's going to be an easy ride for me. But if they tell me, look, we're just way too busy to focus on it, maybe that means it might be a stressful project to work on because everyone's working too fast to like slow down and do things properly. So yeah, first thing is, why do you even need my help? Right? Is it a skills gap, or is it funding constraints, or is it this, or is it this? Another thing I will ask them is, what performance work have you done already, and how did that go? They might say, did nothing at all, that's why we need you. Or they might say, we did some things, but we got lost and we need some help getting back on track. So that'll tell me if I'm picking up some half-complete work or not, which means that I'll be able to decide whether I want the project. And then I'll start looking at things like, tell me who your nearest competitor is. Who do we need to beat? If I can look at their nearest competitor and work out that actually your competitor's really bad, so it's going to be easy for us. Or I could look at their nearest competitor and say, okay, they're doing some really clever stuff, so we'll need to spend a lot of time on our site to make it as good as theirs. And then another thing I'll look at is any existing tools they've got set up. So I ask for access to their Google Analytics. I ask for access to New Relic if they've got it, or SpeedCurve if they've got it, just so I can get an idea of what the current situation is. And then beyond that, we will look at whatever they need. So if it is just a code audit, I'll just sit for a few days and stress test their site. If it's consultancy work, I will find out about what team members they've got, and then it all gets really customized from there. Is that an okay answer? Cool. The most common mistake. So instead of mistake, I'm going to reword it to problem. I'm a bit of I'm very pedantic, but I worry that mistake makes it sound like someone's fault. Yeah. Yeah, so what's the most common problem or mistake that developers make or companies make that leads to slow websites? One is nearly always going to be third parties, right? They don't understand that a third party can do almost anything to your website, right? It's a kind of a very unsafe house guest that you're just trusting won't do anything wrong. So third parties always, but more from a developer's point of view, focusing on tooling rather than user experience. So using entire monolithic JavaScript libraries to make single-page forms, like it shouldn't take 1.2 meg of JavaScript to build up a login form. So things like that, not focusing on end-user experience, focusing way too much on developer convenience. Then there's really obvious stuff like optimizing images. So at Vega at the weekend, one little kind of Scrum team went off and did some optimization on a site where they managed to get the average image size down from 1.7 meg to about 40 kilobytes. And stuff like that is just, it's like low-hanging fruit where you can tackle that stuff really quickly. Then a really common problem, but that isn't, it's too technical to kind of expect people to know it, but things like this. Did you know that swapping a script and a title around will improve perceived performance, right? And that's really technical stuff, and that's why sometimes you need dedicated performance people who know all this stuff. So there's this stuff all the time. This is really common, but it's very, very specific. Is that an okay answer? Cool. Any other questions? About anything as well, it doesn't have to be performance. Well, not anything, actually, that'd be weird, but you know what I mean, somewhere in the middle. Any other questions?
Do you ever test client website without loading JavaScript?
Yes and no, right? Do I ever test a website without JavaScript? The reason I say yes and no is that, honestly, we shouldn't optimize for users who've turned JavaScript off, because they don't really exist anymore. The UK government did some testing on this. They found out that less than 1% of their visitors turn JavaScript off. So optimizing for a non-JavaScript state is more ridiculous than optimizing for an IE6 scenario, if that makes sense. Basically, the non-JavaScript state is rarer than IE6. However, every user is a non-JavaScript user until your JavaScript has arrived. So what I'm saying there is, let's not test for have they disabled JavaScript or can they run JavaScript. Let's test for what happens if the app.js bundle fails to load. So what I will do there is, instead of disabling JavaScript, I'll disable one specific file. As an example, SoundCloud is a pretty well-built client-rendered application. In DevTools, hopefully people can see. Can people at the back generally read each line here, or need to go a bit bigger? Put your hand up if you want me to go a text size bigger. Good eyesight here in Novi Sad. So, what happens if vendor.js doesn't arrive? So I'm not going to disable JavaScript. I'm wondering if this one file either has a JavaScript error and fails to execute, or the network is too slow to actually get this file, or packet loss means that this file keeps having bits of it missing, or whatever reason. Another example is China blocks all Google services. So what happens if you've got your jQuery on a Google CDN and a Chinese visitor visits you? What happens when that JavaScript goes missing? So if you haven't seen this before, it's really powerful. Right-click on the file you're interested in, block request URL, and that will prevent Chrome from downloading that one particular file. And if we run that again, okay. At least, hey look, so this is kind of good. At least they fail somewhat gracefully and give user feedback. So the news here is that if that file doesn't make it, the app is unusable, but at least SoundCloud have somewhat designed around that, or designed for that eventuality. They kind of haven't. They don't fall back to a statically rendered site that could work. They just say, oops, try again later. So yeah, geez, that was another really, everyone's looking at me like, dude, we want to go for a beer. Stop talking. But yeah, long answer to another short question is, I don't test for the no JavaScript scenario. I test for the what happens if anything fails scenario. We're good? Perfect.
I would like to stop questions, sorry.
Mother.
Yeah, I realize you need beer.
I don't need a beer. Everyone out there needs a beer, especially people who are at the workshop at the weekend.
Thank you, man.
Hey, no, thank you, thank you.